potential parents, before they even met any of the children, they of course went through, you know, a rigorous background check and all of that, but they also attended classes about how experiences in utero and early childhood experiences affected the kids. And then they had continual classes even after they adopted, and resources given to them to continue figuring out how they can better help the child, help kind of help them learn how to self-regulate, and then continue that into adulthood to, you know, break that cycle. But the past classes that Brittany was talking about reminded me a lot of that.
I'm sorry I missed everybody that was talking before that last person, but I can hear you all now.
Yay!
It seems like the scratchiness has cut down quite a bit as well. Before it was like every time someone was talking, but now it doesn't seem as bad.
Okay. Yeah, that might have been somehow the way I have no idea. I mean, it doesn't look like much weather here, but who knows? But I'm glad it's up and working now. So I would love to hear just a couple more comments. Did anybody touch on some of these? I know we get really excited about interventions and we can do this, we can train on this. And what are some of those ethical implications that you all can think of that may need to be considered when looking at working with a situation like this in developing interventions?
I would just say that, I mean, one of the ethical implications just for being pregnant in this day and age is that you can do genetic testing. Mm-hmm. So there are ethical implications because, say somebody finds out that their child might have, you know, a pre-existing condition, they can go and have an abortion if they want, or they can choose to have the baby. So I feel like this is sort of along the same lines. It's just adding another layer to genetic testing. But I find the idea of like the whole methylation is fascinating, that genes can be turned on and off. So I feel like there'll be more education with genetic testing now. And when I had my children, I went to a genetic counselor and they went through this whole everything. And it was really interesting, but to sort of know that things can be turned on and off I don't know.
Well, and I mean, if you just look at that issue, I think that's a great point. So if you just look at genetic testing, I mean, it's like 23andMe, you can find out even just your own, you know, what your own genetic makeup is. But especially for people who are pregnant, just looking at the CTE question, which the whole question was, yes, this baby was born with these biological parents, but now they're going to live in this whole different environment. So even if you know what the results of that genetic testing is, where does that leave the role of environment for those parents? And are you having that conversation? Are those people having that conversation? Those genetic counselors, you know, to some degree, I mean, it's slightly cynical, but it's like they're promoting a product. You know, what part of that conversation is saying, well, environmentally, this is what the research shows is the impact of your unique, genetic makeup, which is kind of that, that fulcrum again on the, resiliency scale, so how are you going to move it? What is your responsibility?
And I would say that's really interesting because I remember there was no discussion about environment. It's just like, it's this or it's not this.
Right.
It was just about the physical. It was just about the genes. It wasn't about, what will happen afterwards. So maybe in a way, epigenetics will be a good thing in those cases to educate people that it's not just what's happening or just what they're born with.
Yeah, because you can have a gene, the quote unquote, cancer gene, something like that, and not develop cancer. So, I mean, look at the, Anna Maria Clotilde from the Ghosts in Their Genes documentary, they were identical twins, had identical CPA, sorry, I was reading an error on my screen. They had identical DNA, but one developed cancer and one didn't. So what happens to, So if they had gotten genetic testing when their parents, when their mom was pregnant, what would that have looked like? And then it's because it's just, part of the message of this unit is that your DNA is not your destiny. Your DNA is literally shaped by your environment. I mean, it is exactly shaped by your environment. So it's only one piece of the puzzle. It's a very important piece. Your genetic makeup is very important, but it's not going to dictate everything about your life or who you are.
I think it's also important in terms of like dealing with policy when we do genetic testing, that we kind of err on the side of caution of like, in a sense that like, once we do find out, like all of that can then get reported to like, it can get put in a medical record. It can get reported to your insurance. And then, that can affect the access of care that you or your child will then receive based off of like that diagnosis. And depending on where you fall on, kind of that spectrum of low income to mid income to high income will then determine like what services you're going to be able to provide for this child who may or may not have a debilitating disease or disorder that, you may not have access to. And I think it can perpetuate the problem of like minimal resources available and contribute to like, a poor quality of care, which would then kind of fall into like the whole epigenetic factor of like, well, poverty can also be a transgenerational trait that gets passed on.
I think that's an excellent point, Hillary. It's so important because and y'all are going to cover this in the spring when you take social welfare policy, but every single thing that you all do as social workers is going to be governed by policy. There's really not one thing. If y'all find anything, come and tell me. But every single thing that you do, no matter how insignificant, is somewhere, some way covered by some policy, either organizational policy, community, local, government, federal, state. And so, you can get these really slippery slopes. And I think Hillary's example, it could go down a road depending on the values of the people who are creating the laws and the policies, because that's how laws and policies are drawn up as people's values. So, you could actually perpetuate even further than it is now, this like haves and haves not, haves and have nots. So basically if you have X, Y, and Z characteristics genetically or epigenetically or environmentally, you don't get these other things because they're trying to incentivize it in some way. Or, you don't get this access to care if you don't have this, that, or the other. It really can be this kind of self-perpetuating cycle. I mean, I know there's a lot of you all in Tennessee, and some of you may know, and if you're not in Tennessee, I'll explain. I think a really interesting example of this, the law has been sunset, but which means it's no longer in existence, but it was for 2 years, and it was just sunset, I think 2 years ago at this point. But for, we have a massive opioid epidemic problem really in the country, yes. Very, very much in the state of Tennessee. And there were a lot of women who were pregnant who were using opioids and then giving birth to babies who were born drug dependent, or we call that NAS, or neonatal abstinence syndrome. And so these little babies had this horrible withdrawal symptoms from these, what was oftentimes a prescription medication from their doctor. It wasn't always, heroin or something like that. Most of the time it was prescription drugs, but the law actually criminalized the mothers. So if you had a baby with an NAS diagnosis, you could be charged with, in Tennessee, it was a misdemeanor. So it wasn't a felony. It wouldn't necessarily relate in jail time. But a lot of those babies also wound up in DPS custody. So we just said right off the bat, you use drugs when you're pregnant, you cannot, our value says that you are not a fit parent. So you can't. You can't have that baby. And so when you think about what we just talked about with the susceptibility for epigenetic changes in utero is massively high. And then to mention the environment that those babies experience while they're in the NICU for so many months and things like that. And then when they go home and they have a parent in recovery, or they're in a whole new home. And that was a law that actually existed that very much, I think, is relevant to, epigenetics and how we continue to see this. So if the more that we learn and the more that we realize that what we do even before we're pregnant impacts, babies, I mean, people could think, I'm very curious about the world. I don't really know how this is going to land for people down the road, and which is why I'm so excited to talk about it with you all.
I just wanted to make one more comment just based on Hillary's comment with the whole policy thing. I can just really see this turning like the abortion debate on its head, because when I watched The Ghost in Your Genes, they said that, this is happening in like at conception, these things were methylation. So I just feel like there could be so many implications in that regard, that can be whichever way you're going. I don't know. It's whichever way people think it's just going to be even more crazy in my opinion.
Yeah. It's good. It's actively rewriting our understanding of biology. It is absolutely, we used to say that genetics determined everything. And now we know pretty concretely that is that's just one piece. We are, what was it, 98.9%, had similar genetic makeup as apes. So, what makes us so different? It's only one piece of the story. And so being overly focused on our genetic makeup is very limiting. And right now, all of, our policies do not necessarily follow our knowledge in this area. And so as our knowledge grows, I would expect it will take many, many decades to catch up. But eventually we will take this information into consideration. And I am, very curious how this lands for you all. And when you think about the advances in technology, our laws are only just now, starting to address those. They still just frankly don't in so many cases. So it's going to be a long transition. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it will happen eventually. So there is such a potential for a slippery slope. It says, okay, well, you drank, when you were pregnant, or, oh, you smoked cigarettes before you got pregnant, and that, you didn't create a good environment for your child. So, you don't get this license to be pregnant or what. It's like, who knows where this could go? We just don't know. So glad we're talking about it. Okay, let's get a couple more comments, and then let's turn it over to our group number 1.
I think while it can be a very slippery slope, and while it can create kind of a hopelessness that I feel like a lot of people feel in thinking about genetics and thinking about their choices, and we're surrounded by media and things that tell us that, oh, everyone's going to get cancer no matter what you do. I think it is important to for our understanding, and then our later policies and everything that we're going to be doing, that it isn't just genetics, it is our environment as well. And even if, you've made mistakes before, you whether knowingly or just you had no idea that it was going to affect later on, that what you do now can affect later on. You can rewrite, like there is that plasticity in the brain.
Absolutely. So well said, Shelby. Thank you. That is so well said. It's, and social workers, our roles, we're to be agents of hope. We can, that's, kind of one of the goals of the CTE is that those adoptive parents could feel really helpless, but, because they kind of may feel like their child has the, their kind of genetic cards stacked against them, but there's so many opportunities for mitigation and amelioration and, prevention of long-term issues, depending on how you choose as parents, as communities, as policymakers to help shape that child's environment. And I do agree with you that is a huge kind of ray of hope, and helps me not completely want to fall off the deep end with how depressing this material can be. So I love that hope. Okay, let's have one last comment. Yes, I know, Handmaid's Tale, goodness. Any last thoughts? Okay, well, group number 1, we are going to turn it over to you. As y'all are getting ready up to bat, I will just remind everybody that they did a great job of following the instructions and posting their skit and their handout on the discussion board, so everybody can access it there. And like they said, y'all can follow along on that. There is a way for you all to also attach documents by just, when you hit reply, there's a little paperclip symbol on the bottom left, right under the comment box in the reply, that you can actually attach a document. So if that's ever helpful for any of you all, you have that there as well. So you can either cut and paste stuff in there, or attach your presentations, or attach a link, or just use a link in the comment box, whatever works for you all moving forward. Okay, so I will turn it over to Mary and Courtney.
So I don't know if Mary's here. She's in Alabama and she lost power, but
Courtney, yeah. No pressure.
But the parent role of it is really simple. It's just going to sound really silly with me playing both parts.
Okay.
So I guess just bear with me. So basically, if anybody didn't get my flyer, I emailed it out. I pinned it to the discussion, but you couldn't see the images, unfortunately. So if you guys just look really quick, is it gonna work? Yes. So if you guys can see it, so that's my flyer. So what our scenario is we're the social worker for an infant in foster care. He is a newborn and has been relinquished for adoption. Both birth parents have a known history of drug addiction and have been incarcerated for violent crimes. The law and agency policy requires you to talk about this infant's background to potential adoptive parents. Armed with your knowledge of epigenetics and using all of our readings, class discussions, and the importance of vocabulary for this unit, discuss the issue of the probability that the child will repeat his birth parents' history of drug abuse, crime, and violence. All right. So I kind of wanted to turn this into like a seminar. So say all of you are potential adoptive parents and you're attending the seminar. All right. So thank you for attending tonight's seminar. We are here to answer some of the most common questions adoptive parents have. Many potential parents come in and ask what the birth parents' health, drug, and criminal histories, wondering if those traits or decisions will affect the child. We are obligated to share this information with you and know that it creates a lot of confusion and questions for you. We are here tonight to clear up some of the questions, such as how will a birth parent's drug use affect my child? How will birth parents' anger management problem affect my child's personality? Is there any chance the child will have my personality traits? How can poor maternal nutrition affect my child's well-being? And the list goes on. We hope this seminar is very interactive, so please ask questions that you feel are necessary. So the parent. Hi, we are potential adoptive parents of a newborn whose birth parents have long histories of drug abuse and incarceration. We have some concerns in regards to his parents' drug and violence history and how it will affect the child. This is a very common concern. What specific questions do you have as a parent? Seeing as both parents have been incarcerated for violent crimes, what is the likelihood the child's temperament will be similar to theirs in nature? I understand the child was removed from the home as an infant, but could his exposure to violence in the womb be a factor, or could he inherit violent traits? The social worker. Your concern is what we like to describe as nature versus nurture. Yes, there are traits which the child will genetically inherit from his parents, but what you expose the child to will help him develop his personality further. Some negative traits may not even develop if you expose him to a healthy environment, i.e., anger, maternal violence. One study showed that we can measure the level of a child's anger by 2 to 3 months of age and fear between 7 to 10 months of age. And about your concern with the amount of stress he might have experienced in the fetus, this is what we like to call fetal programming. An unborn child is in its own environment, and certain things the child is exposed to will prepare the fetus for the environment it's about to inherit. For example, a fetus who has nourishment issues may be born smaller and not need as many calories to sustain life. Or a fetus who is exposed to maternal stress could have chemical imbalance within the brain, which can come into effect later in life. This is why we urge women to monitor stress levels during pregnancy. The parent. Okay, so this is about genes, right? And that's the stuff we get from our parents. Social worker. Yes, we have 2 copies of each gene, one from each parent. Usually genes are the same from both, but occasionally there are slight differences in them. When that happens, it's called an allele, the same gene, but with slight variations in their DNA sequences. Parent. Okay, should I worry about genetic disorders? I know I've heard that stress can cause chemical imbalances. The social worker. A genetic disorder develops because there is a mutation in the gene, which is inherited by one or both parents. Some genetic disorders are even caused by certain environmental factors. There was a study recently on the stress levels of twins who were or weren't exposed to violence and maternal smoking. These twins displayed patterns of genetic and environmental influences. Have you heard of epigenetics before? The parent? No, I have not. Social worker. Epigenetics is the study of changes in organisms caused by modification of gene expression rather than alternation of the gene code itself. In simpler terms, epigenetics is what controls genes, and certain experiences in life can either turn off or turn on these genes. Epigenetics is what tells an eye to be an eye or skin to be skin. But it can also be influenced by environmental factors such as nutrition, psychological state, and even the level of toxic exposure a person experiences. Epigenetic alterations can even be transgeneral, affecting grandchildren. Parent. So the criminal history of the parents could actually affect the child. The child could end up a felon even if we raise him to be other. Social worker. Honestly, this is a new area of research, and we are constantly learning more things that make the relationship between nature and nurture more complex. Researchers have found evidence that environment can cause epigenetic alterations, but at the same time, there are many studies that support early childhood intervention that is potentially just as influential or even more influential. Parent. So what you're saying is that the genetic traits the child inherits from his birth, parents could include personality traits, but that the child's surrounding environment after he is born is very influential in his traits and health later in life. There's no guarantee what this child has or has not received from his parents. The social worker, this is correct. All right, so now my question for the class. After reading about epigenetics this week, what response would you have for the parents wondering if the child will have lingering mental or physical issues from the birth parent's history of drug addiction and incarceration? Jeopardy.
Will you repeat the question, please? I'm sorry.
It's okay. So yeah, I could probably type it in too. All right, so what response would you have for the parents wondering if the child will have lingering mental or physical issues from the birth parent's history of drug addiction and incarceration? What else would you tell them in regards to epigenetics?
Well, in regards to epigenetics, I would tell them that being that the child is currently an infant, that's actually serves more as a protective factor for them, kind of experiencing the full impact of growing up in a violent environment or a drug-dependent environment where there's a lack of comprehension of the instability. So it actually beneficial for the adoptive parents to be the current caregivers of that infant, because that's kind of what protects understanding like the gravity of like their current situation.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point, because he is an infant, so he hasn't been exposed so much to any violence in the home. He was taken. So I guess one of the biggest things that we were trying to talk to the parents here was what happened when the mother was pregnant, and also what the child could have inherited from his parents. So does anybody have any other ideas of how they can make the parents feel better about adopting?
I would just suggest that there's early intervention programs that you can do from 0 to 3 years old for children. So if they could get somebody to come in and just start early intervention from the get-go, that could help with any sort of developmental delays. They would sort of have a leg up from the beginning versus sort of, that wait and see approach. It's just, they could just be more proactive about having somebody who's professionally trained to sort of pick up on any signs.
Okay. I read the comment too.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I would just try to focus on the strengths of the neuroplasticity of the brain during early infancy, and also the importance of the environment and warmth and nurturing, and just really build upon those strengths and focus on those.
Okay, that's a good point. Would anybody personally ever adopt a child who came from this background? What would be your worry about it? I know it's a different question, but it gets a little bit more personal.
I would probably adopt a child with that kind of background, but my main worry would just be, I guess, how they would get along with my own children. They would have been, they would be my child too. I don't want to have that separation. I don't mean that, but just the personalities clashing, because my children have mine and my husband's personalities already, and sometimes we develop personalities from our parents, even if it's not something that we've been exposed to them. There's been a lot of studies on adoption and things where children would pick up behaviors from their parents and things like that, even though they've never met them. That would be my concern, would just be how they would get along with my own children and mesh into our family unit.
I think I would also consider doing that as well, because I just think about, siblings who are all raised in the same family and how they can be extremely different, even though they receive the same parenting. So I would have the same worry you can have with raising 3 kids that you assume are going to be similar, and one could be like the black sheep and do things that you're like, I don't know where you got this from or where you learned this from. I feel like it's somewhat similar to this situation. Like, you just don't know. Sometimes I feel like there's no rhyme or reason. I mean, I have 2 siblings, and one of them is just very different from me and my brother. I don't understand it necessarily. So I don't think I would allow what could be to make me afraid. Because I feel like in that case, then why would anyone adopt? Because sometimes you don't know. There's no rhyme or reason sometimes.
Brianna, I like your comment. Can you share with behavior issues that they had?
Wait, who are you talking to me, Kendria, or?
Oh no, it was Brianna. Brianna just wrote a comment in the
Brianna,
chat.
okay.
Sorry.
Okay, got it.
If my microphone will work, I can try and talk. Can you guys hear me? Clients that I've worked with, they had a lot of behavior issues, and one that I'm thinking about, he actually was diagnosed with autism, and later they went back on that diagnosis, but they found out later he was adopted out of DCS custody, and they found out the mom had used heavy drug use while she was pregnant, and so that child had a lot of aggression issues, and he was brought up in a very nurturing environment. They were very loving parents, but he had this kind of failure to thrive, and he just did not, he just became very aggressive, and they really didn't know how to deal with that. So it was really hard on them because they had 2 children of their own that had to kind of watch all of that progress, and it was a long, hard battle for them. And their 2 other children were completely different. And then they also adopted another child kind of around the same time who didn't have any of those issues. He had great temperament. He had a little bit of ADHD problems, but nowhere near the aggression that the other child had.
See, and that's scary. That's where it's hard, because I always thought about that, adopting a child and then experiencing that and not knowing what to do because of the background or what their parents did. So, anybody have anything else they want to share?
I think those situations where adoption of a child with a very traumatic background, I totally just lost my sentence, so that sentence didn't make any sense. But I think the important thing with that is that keeping in mind those fears as we learn to create policy and to find interventions that help, like, I think it's important to continue driving home that neuroplasticity, because there are going to be situations where children become violent because of the experiences they've had, and that just shows the pain and the suffering that they've gone through, and it's going to take a lot, and usually a lifelong process of learning how to self-care and how to overcome those things. But I think that's where the policies and the education come in to make it possible to talk about those fears and to learn how to handle those fears and the difficult situations that come through those experiences. Does that make sense at all? I know I kind of tripped over my words a lot.
No,
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, because we also have to be cognizant of the fact that, like, as much as we don't like to admit it, nobody wants to have a problem child. Nobody wants to, deal with situations that are going to be uncomfortable for the family dynamic. And I think it's important as we deal with potential adoptive parents to say, we do have these resources available, and, this, may not be the easiest pathway for you or for this child, but, like, at the end of the day, like, we need to advocate for quality of care of these children and love of these children, because I think this is also kind of the current problem that we're dealing with the foster system being completely inundated with children who aren't, getting adopted, or who are jumping from foster home to foster home, because a lot of these children do have or have had drug dependency problems, or have grown up in a violent environment that has contributed to some maladaptive behaviors. But I think really driving home the fact that, there are community-based resources for the parents to reach out to and for the children to utilize could really help in, parents who potentially want to adopt.
And to piggyback off of Hillary's comment, like, when parents adopt, like in the scenario that we just talked about, when you're adopting an infant, you have no idea what you're going to get until a lot later. So you don't know if you're adopting a child that is, going to have behavior problems. You have no idea until much later. So it's definitely kind of a risk that any parent's going to take. You want to think that you're adopting a child and you're going to love it and it's going to be this healthy, normal child, but you don't know what the history is and or what. Yeah, I'm tripping over my words now, but yeah, that's just what I was trying to say.
Yeah, and I think that's the general risk as any potential parent. Like, as a mother with 3 biological children, I don't know, one child versus the other, if one's going to, eventually have an ADHD diagnosis, or, I'm going to have 2 kids with an ADHD diagnosis. I think that's just the general risk when you're dealing with infants, not necessarily related to adoption versus biological, although you do have a greater level of uncertainty with adoption because you don't know the genetic background.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for participating in the discussion and making it not awkward for me. So thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Wow, I wasn't prepared for how hard it was going to be for me to not participate in the discussion. I kept on wanting to say woo and jump in there. I really appreciate those challenge questions, and I appreciate your fortitude with persevering with your not just -1 person but -2. So thank you for braving the solo round and being the first up to bat. That is definitely challenging. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of you who really demonstrated what I would consider as, active engagement. So anytime you hear me say, active engagement, that is, what you all just did is definitely that. And you also really covered just general reflections. You really covered a breadth of important issues from, yes, some of the epigenetic pieces, but kind of going back to policies and value judgments, and all of that is so incredibly relevant. And I don't know if it was Hillary or Brianna, but it was kind of hard to figure out who was talking, but whoever said that, these are worries and fears that we have about our own kids. So you can kind of take the adoption piece out of it. And we have kids every day that grow up to have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, biological children that become serial killers. I mean, there's whole, we run, I know it's morbid, but we run the gamut. And so these issues that potential adoptive parents face, so many of those issues are exactly the same as what is faced by biological parents. Some of those differences come in when we overlay our judgments, or just basically around sometimes even worthiness or things like that, or I think that I'm going to have some kind of perfect child that I'm going to adopt, but we don't really know. And so there's no better intervention. What science has shown is there's no better intervention. There's no amount of money that is going to be built to design some evidence-based practice. There's nothing that is going to be better than a consistent, safe, stable, and nurturing environment for a child, regardless of their genetic makeup. When you provide those environments for children, that is what shapes the genetic load that they're coming in with. So when you can shape that environment, it really is going to be in a positive direction. It's going to help the trajectory of that child in a positive way. Going back to that resilience scale, it's stacking all of those protective factors so that when those risk factors do come up, like a propensity towards, or kind of reactivity or aggression, or some of those tendencies that you all talked about, when you have, those protective factors in place, they can help to mitigate those from kind of really those issues from flourishing. And it doesn't always work. We know that for sure, but it's definitely our best defense and our best possible intervention are those safe, stable, and nurturing environments. Okay, so it is 6:37. So we are going to jump into our kind of conclude our kind of formal class and jump into our office hours if there's no other general questions or comments from folks. Thank you for bearing with me on the technical difficulties I had. Hopefully we'll fix that for next time.
I had a question on the CTEs. Like we have one that's due in, say, October that we're interested in doing. Would we be able to just go ahead and turn it in whenever, or do we have to wait until it's due?
No. You can turn it in whenever. As soon as I get the links uploaded, which it should be, because I mean, I think the link is, forgive me, let me pull it up. Oh yeah, it's under assignments. So you can,
because I want to think you have a list of when each one is due with the example, well, not the examples, but the scenario that we need to follow for the CTE and stuff like that. And I found the assignments page where we submit it at, but I just wasn't sure, like, if we just submitted it whenever, or as long as we specified what it was.
I mean, if you want to submit it early, I mean, yeah, that's up to you, you know, as long as you're integrating all those required readings and the vocabulary and all that good stuff. Even if we haven't covered that unit, if you want to work ahead and do that, you can do that. The only rule about the CTE submission of your choice, which is under the assignments page or assignments link, the only issue is once you submit it, that's it. So you can only pick one, and that's the one that I will grade. So you can't, you know, submit one for unit 3 and then say, oh wait, I really, you know, I want to 6. So that's the only rule. So you can totally submit ahead. Yes. So yes is the.
Okay. I was mainly asking because one of the ones that I liked was due during a week that I have a bunch of other assignments due. So I was just like, well, it might be good to get it out of the way when things are a little slower as opposed to.
Yeah, Jade, that's an excellent point. And that's actually one, especially for you all, that's one of the reasons why I posted all of that now and gave y'all the choice, is so that you could really understand when those due dates were and understand, you know, in advance what all that, what all the CTEs were, so you could really kind of map out your semester. So well done. Yes. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. We have 20 minutes left for office hours. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and you all are welcome to jump off if you want to jump off, or you can stay and ask me any questions about anything else. Thank you all very much, and I enjoyed our discussion tonight. I look forward to seeing you all next week.